Alright, here we are. We're going to have ourselves a good old conversation about mental illness and how it's been treated throughout history. And we're going to come back at the end on this one and talk about reaction paper. What is that? 7, 8. Reaction paper 8. And we're going to talk about Freud and mental illness, okay? So, as usual, remind me to come back to this at the end, alright? Alright, so here's a quick reminder of what we had talked about the last time. What is mental illness? And as before, very briefly, I'm just going to say behavior which runs counter to normal adaptive behavior, alright? Counter to adaptation or something like that. And as we talked about in the last presentation, there's been 3 different approaches to mental illness, or perspectives rather. Perspectives are a way of viewing the medical model of mental illness, the psychological model of mental illness, and the supernatural perspective on mental illness. And at different times in history, some have dominated more than others. And so, let us talk. First off, we're going to be coming into psychotherapy a little bit, but I want you to make sure that you do not fall victim to thinking about the world in modern eyes. Psychotherapy, by definition, is any attempt to help a person with a mental disturbance. Now, it doesn't have to be a successful attempt, okay? Because there's a lot of stuff that's out there right now that is not necessarily successful, but the people that are doing it for the best, they have the best of intentions. So when we get to even wacky things like exorcisms, that's psychotherapy. Now, it's misguided, but it's psychotherapy, and it's an attempt, okay? And the type of therapy which is used is often a product of the type of view you have on mental illness, okay? And so we talk about biotherapies or psychotherapies, same. If you have a biological view of mental illness, then you're more likely to do biotherapies, etc., okay? So here we are in history. The world before the ancient Greeks really was a world of magic. As we've talked about repeatedly, the world was magic. That is, remember, humans are explanatory creatures. They want to explain things. Why did that happen? So we invented science as a way to answer that question. Why did that happen? Of course, we have religion as an answer to why did that happen. But back in before ancient Greece really fully developed, the world didn't have any theme to organize itself, and so the world was magic, The gods are excited. The gods are angry. So the entire view of mental illness was just basically, and then gods got mad and shit happens. If you can summarize mental illness as the gods were pissed at you, that's really how the earliest views of mental illness were. But then along came people in ancient Greece, in particular, like Hippocrates, and they were the first ones to start to think about medicine from a biological perspective. They felt that physical health resulted from the balance among the 4 humors in the body, right? The physical health, the job of a physician, okay, was to diagnose the misbalance. The 4 humors in the body are black bile and yellow bile and blood and I don't know, something else. And they need to be in balance, says these early physicians. And if you're ill, it's because there's maybe too much of one or not enough of another, or something is out of balance. The physician's job is to find that imbalance and correct it. All right? Really simple. This notion of these bodily humors was also applied to mental disorders. And so you find during the time of Hippocrates that treatments for mental disorders often included things like spa. Go to the spa and get your black bile back in balance with your yellow bile, or what yellow bile is. It's kind of gross. Black bile is probably worse. Okay? But it was an interesting approach. But it didn't last, okay? In particular, when Rome collapsed. See, when Rome collapsed, we were back to a point, as we know, when Rome collapsed, I mean, anything that even resembled rational thinking was gone, okay? And the world became dark, the Dark Ages, okay? And so the psychiatry of the Middle Ages can scarcely be distinguished from pre-scientific demonology, and mental treatment was synonymous with exorcism. In medieval exorcism, Christian mythology, and prehistoric... All right, during this time, what happened was there was a belief that psychological disorders were caused by demons entering your body, and so psychotherapy was literally a situation where let's make the body so undesirable that the demon wants to leave. So people that had mental illnesses were all kinds of things. They'd throw cold water in their face all day long, or they'd tie them in a chair and spin it really fast, or they would do some crazy stuff. I mean, they thought, if you're infected by a demon, we're just going to make the body so nasty the demon won't want to stay. All right, misguided, but it is some kind of psychotherapy. It got so bad, though, that as we know, see, the witch craze during the Middle Ages, though of course we can't be certain, it seems fairly likely that the majority of the women involved or accused of witchcraft probably had mental disorders, okay? And so the Malleus Maleficarum, that's a neat word. I like the word, but I guess it translates as the witch's hammer. Nice. All right. And so it was really a book designed to teach people how to detect witchcraft, all right? And it was kind of a crazy thing because for a good couple of 100 years, you got to imagine that every judge in the world basically had Malleus Maleficarum on the left and the Bible on the right, okay? And that is how they fed out their justice. Yeah, it was pretty vicious. Well, it got a little bit better, okay? You know, like Johann Weyer, let me guess, he's probably from Netherlands, right? He writes The Deception of Demons. He says, look, Malleus Maleficarum doesn't make sense. Reginald Scott, he writes Discovery of Witchcraft, where he essentially writes out, they're just people with mental illness. They're normal people. They're not like demon-possessed or something. And in 1682, in France, the King of France, Louis XIV, says, forget it, no more killing witches, all right? They were still treated poorly, okay? But again, I mean, we gotta not be blinded by our modern view. I mean, there was treatment, just ineffective treatment, all right? Misguided treatment, but they were trying, okay? Well, as the Renaissance came along, remember one of the things that came about was a rise of humanism, right? More of a belief that each individual mattered, okay? As we know, the themes were individualism, personal relationships with God, interest in classical wisdom, hence pull back a little Hippocrates. But really, the result of humanism was this concept, this idea that the mentally ill should be treated like the physically ill. It's not their fault. It just is what it is, okay? So it's a major shift in thinking about the change in the perspective, right? And then, of course, the most famous of the people at this point is Philippe Pinel, who was in charge of the La Basitre, the main hospital in Paris. And he's put in charge. He goes in and he finds that there's these mental patients there. And basically it goes like this. Admission into the hospital is basically a one-way ticket. You're going to go in, and then that is where you will die, because nobody gets out. Okay, there was no treatment. Treatment was locking them up, tying them, right? And so he says, let them go. I mean, it's this treatment that the way that we're treating them now is preventing them from improving. So he frees them from their chains. He talks to them about their problems. He pays attention to case histories. He starts to, and all of a sudden, guess what happens under Philippe Pinel is people start to actually be released from the hospital, okay? They actually are left out. So really a big thing. Now, in different parts of the world, different people, well, we call this the moral treatment movement, and in different parts of the world, like in England, Benjamin Rush really led the moral treatment movement. In the United States, Dorothea Dix is normally given credit for this. Dorothea Dix was she went into the prison to tutor the women in women's prisons, and when she gets there, she realizes there are mental patients here, and her basic thing is prison by definition is about punishment. Why are we putting a mentally ill person into a system which is designed for punishment? That's what a prison is. It's designed to punish. So why are we going to punish them? It's not their fault. They didn't like choose to do it. This is not the product of who they are or what they did. And so this moral treatment movement was a big movement, a big change for psychology. or for the world view? Well, I want to talk a little bit here about the way we view it. And Emil Kraepelin worked with Wundt, right? Wilhelm Wundt had been classifying sensations and breaking this stuff apart. And so Kraepelin, see, before Kraepelin, basically, I mean, I'm simplifying. I'm keeping it simple, but before Kraepelin, basically, there's two categories of mental illness: crazy and not crazy. That's it. There's no these words that we think of: schizophrenia, depression, melancholia. Well, melancholia was around, but there was no real distinction. But what Kraepelin discovered was that symptoms don't just, when somebody has symptoms of mental disorders, it's not like people get random collections. They tend to cluster together. That is, if somebody has feelings of hopelessness, then they often also have loss of appetite and difficulty sleeping. See, these tend to work together. They cluster, all right? And so he decided that he was going to try to identify different types of mental illness, not just crazy versus not crazy. And of course, this work turned into what we now know as the DSM. Now, in a different class, take a senior capstone or something, I'll give you my 2 cents on the DSM. It's a necessary evil for now. I think that there are better alternatives, okay? So it is what it is. But Kraepelin is the one that really decided to break it down. And the beauty of breaking it down, though, is that, as we know, the goal of treatment is prognosis, right? Prognosis is really what it comes down to, because a prognosis is a prediction. The best prediction that we have for the outcome or what's going to happen. And in order to create a prognosis, you must have a diagnosis, right? And so it was Kraepelin that set up the notion that we could diagnose somebody, and if you can diagnose them and put them into a category, then it allows us to predict something about what's going to happen to them and what treatments might work for them. Okay? Well, the birth of, it's a variety of people might be considered to be the father of clinical psychology, but Leitner Whitmer is probably given the most credit. Okay? I like Leitner Whitmer, besides the fact that his name is really cool, alright? It is, come on, dude. Leitner Whitmer, oh, that's awesome. But I respect him a lot, okay? Because here's what he said. He said, therapy or counseling is an application of psychology. And in order to be a clinician or therapist or whatever, you must first be a scientist, okay? He established what is called the scientist practitioner model, okay? He truly believed, and he wanted to set this up, that in order to apply psychology, you must first understand the science of it. You must first be a scientist. Okay? And I'm cool with that. I like that, all right? Now, therapy's not for me. I'm not a counseling guy, all right? But I respect what he says here, okay? Because I think that counseling is a very, very valid application of psychology. But I agree with Leitner Whitmer that if you are not a scientist first, then you have no business applying it. Because if you don't have a basic understanding of how it works, that's negligence or worse. I mean, you have no business applying something that you don't have a good understanding of. All right. So now, that's Kraepelin. Hold on. So now we're going to get just one little Freud thing for today. The next show will be called Freud 101. Charcot was an interesting character, and he was studying hysteria, and he found that these symptoms were similar to things he found under hypnosis. He felt that hysteria was caused by the idea of physical injury. He found that it was most common in hypnotizable. And here's the deal. Freud is one of Charcot's patients, okay? Or patients. Students, whatever, right? Although Freud should be a patient of somebody, right? But he's one of Charcot's students, all right? And he takes this completely. And so now, going right back to this paper here. I'll warn you now, I put the paper here. You may want to watch the next presentation before you truly tackle this paper, because I'm going to answer, I'll do what I can here, but some of this is going to be better answered in the next show. I realize now, as I'm setting it up, that This isn't completely in this presentation, but that's all right. So here we go. Though it is unarguable that people with mental illness are treated better than they once were, the situation is still far from perfect. Yes, it is, definitely. Generally, people have discarded beliefs that mental illness is caused by a form of cosmic karma or as a punishment from God. Like I said, when I say people, I mean people in the West, because people in other parts of the world truly believe that, all right? But even here in the West, it's not gone, all right? Because here's the deal. If you have the medical view, or if you take the medical perspective or the psychological perspective, then guess what? Mental illness is not my fault. I can't control it. If you take the supernatural approach, it's your fault. You did something wrong. God don't like you. Okay? So, however, there are clearly cases where people with mental illness are treated as less than a whole person. Like, yeah, in court cases or something, you bring a person on a witness stand, and then the opposing lawyer goes, yeah, you know, she was in a mental hospital last year, unrelated to this situation. Or in court custody cases, clearly this is the kind of thing that can sway the jury. So, here is your chance to throw out your 2 cents, all right? This is your opinion. Back it up. Now, not just opinion. I don't want nobody to be just opinionated blowhards. I want opinions that you back up with facts. No. What is your opinion of the current treatment of people with mental illness? Are we doing good? We're clearly doing better as I start here, but are we doing what we need to do? Are people with mental illnesses treated as less than a person? Are we taking away? Hey, maybe as a thought, if you go back to the Bill of Rights in our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the first some number I can't remember of amendments to the Constitution says, just because you are a human being, these are the rights that you have. Okay, and these rights are in many ways stripped from people with mental illness, but the Constitution doesn't say these are the rights that you have if we choose to give them to you. It says, no, because you were born and you're a human being, you have these fundamental rights. Now, are people with mental illnesses treated as a human being? If that is how you define a human being anyway, right? And so here, are people's fears of people with mental illness justified? Yes or no? I mean, up to you. People do fear mental illness, absolutely. Is it justified? Okay, and then this last question is one which I covered some of it here, but some of it will be in the next show. So, like I said, you may want to watch the next video before you tackle it. But were Freud's contributions to psychology's... I can't read that. There. Were Freud's contributions to psychology's conception of mental illness a good thing for the treatment of people with mental illness? We're going to get into this the next time. We're going to talk about unconscious conflicts and stuff. But what Freud's view really does, okay, is it makes a very deterministic statement. Mental illnesses are very determined. That is to say, there is no free will here. That is, you don't have any choice. It is what it is. You're going to get them. And so, well, I mean, if you got them, it was inevitable is what I mean. Huh? Inevitable? Got it. Okay. So, we're going to talk more about these unconscious conflicts creating, and it's not my fault kind of a thing. But I'll tell you that this question of not my fault, this is not my opinion paper, but if it was my opinion paper, I could tell you that sometimes people use this excuse, it's not my fault. And in fact, just recently up here in where I'm living, they had a kid, right? 16 years old, steals his parents' car, truck, something, gets drunk, driving around with his buddies, slams into a car that's parked by the side of the road trying to fix your car, kills 3 people by the side of the road. The 2 passengers in his vehicle fly through the front window and are mangled. He goes to court, and then here's his defense, and they said, well, it's not his fault because it's affluence. He has affluenza, they said. Affluenza. That is, he was spoiled so badly that he doesn't understand the consequences of his behaviors, so he cannot be held liable for a crime since he couldn't understand the consequences of his behavior. So that's essentially the same argument which is used in the defense, guilty but what was it? but mentally incapacitated or something, whatever, the insanity defense. It's the insanity defense, but put up in the affluenza terms. So does this notion of mental illness is not my fault, does it sort of just become an excuse? Does it sort of take away responsibility? Not my fault? Okay, we're going to get more on this when we talk in the unconscious conflicts and stuff in the next slideshow on Freud 101. So I'll see you the next time, all right?